Before I start, please like and subscribe. They laughed when a 72-year-old billionaire chose his maid over a woman everyone called perfect. But no one was laughing when the wedding was interrupted, and the truth behind those photos came out. Augustine was not just wealthy, he was respected. A retired judge whose name carried weight in every room, a man known for discipline, structure, and quiet authority. Even after losing his wife, people still looked at him as a symbol of dignity. And then there was Cynthia, graceful, polished, always dressed like she belonged beside him. For 2 years she had been there, at every dinner, every gathering, every moment that mattered. To everyone watching, she wasn't just a friend of his late wife, she was the obvious next chapter. But Miriam? Miriam was everything Cynthia was not. She spoke too loudly. She interrupted conversations. She argued openly with Augustine, sometimes in front of guests, pointing her finger at a man no one else would dare challenge. People called her disrespectful, embarrassing, completely out of place in a house like his. To them, she wasn't just wrong for him, she was a problem. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of Augustine's study, but the warmth did little to ease the tension inside. Augustine sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing financial reports with the precision of decades of experience. He didn't hear Miriam approaching until her sharp voice cut through the quiet. "Augustine, you promised me yesterday you wouldn't touch another drop." She stepped into the room without knocking, her finger jabbing toward him with undeniable authority. Augustine froze, his pen hovering over the ledger. "Miriam, I don't want to hear excuses," she interrupted, her voice rising. "If you keep drinking like this, you won't live to see next year. Do you even understand what you're doing to yourself?" The staff peeking through the ajar door exchanged worried glances. "She's too much," one whispered. "He should just ignore her." In the adjoining parlor, the socialites paused mid-tea. They frowned, silently judging the maid for her public disrespect toward a man of Augustine's stature. And then there was Cynthia. She stood quietly, perfectly poised, her expression betraying nothing. But she was watching, analyzing. To her, this wasn't an argument, it was an opportunity. This was the kind of behavior she could exploit to prove that Augustine had made a terrible mistake. Miriam's voice didn't falter, even as Augustine's face grew red with frustration. She leaned closer, her tone relentless. "I will not stand by and watch you destroy yourself. Not again." To the audience in the room, she looked emotionally unstable, dangerous, out of line. And yet, beneath the storm of words carried an unseen purpose, one only Augustine could recognize. The room trembled with judgment. To everyone watching, Miriam looked like a problem. But what if she was the only one trying to save his life? The dining hall glowed with soft light, the long table set to perfection as Augustine hosted one of his usual private gatherings. Close friends, distant relatives, and influential acquaintances filled the room with polite laughter. It was the kind of evening where everything felt predictable, structured, refined, exactly the way Augustine liked it. Cynthia sat to his right, elegant as ever, her posture flawless. She poured his wine without asking, adjusting details on the table as if it already belonged to her. To everyone watching, she wasn't just a guest anymore, she was already in position. Miriam, on the other hand, moved with none of that grace. No performance, no charm, just efficiency and blunt presence. And every time she passed, eyes followed her with quiet disapproval. Dinner continued. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. Then, Augustine set his glass down. The sound was soft, but it carried. The room gradually quieted as he lifted his gaze, his expression calm, composed, deliberate. All attention shifted to him. Cynthia's smile deepened, her fingers resting lightly against the table, already anticipating what everyone else assumed. Augustine paused. "I'm getting married." A ripple of pleased murmurs moved through the room. Someone even smiled toward Cynthia.
Then, Augustine finished. To Miriam. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered. The air itself seemed to stop moving. A whisper broke somewhere at the far end of the table. Miriam? Cynthia didn't speak, but for the first time her perfect composure cracked. Just slightly. Her smile held, but her eyes sharpened. Something colder settling behind them. Around the table, shock turned into discomfort, and then into quiet outrage. That was the moment. Everything began to fall apart. The dinner ended, but the tension didn't. It followed Augustine into the hallways, into quiet corners, into conversations that were no longer polite, but urgent. One by one, they moved in. An old colleague whispered near the grand staircase, "Augustine, think about what you're doing. You're ruining your legacy. This will overshadow everything you've built." Another was less careful, his voice sharp with disbelief. "She's beneath you. Let's not pretend otherwise. This isn't just unconventional. It's embarrassing." Augustine stood still, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He simply listened, as if none of it had the power to move him. But the pressure didn't stop. It came in waves, concern disguised as advice, judgment masked as loyalty. Across the room, Cynthia watched it all unfold. She didn't rush. She didn't interrupt. She waited. Then, when the crowd thinned and the voices quieted, she walked over, graceful, composed, exactly as she had always been. He turned to her. Years of familiarity and unspoken expectations hung in the silence. Then, she smiled. "If that's what you truly want, I support you." Her voice was gentle, controlled, perfect. Anyone watching would have admired her dignity. But there was something else beneath it, something colder. Her eyes didn't soften, they sharpened. This wasn't acceptance, it was patience. Cynthia wasn't reacting, she was waiting. And whatever she was planning, it hadn't even begun yet. The announcement didn't just shock the room, it spread like wildfire. Within days, Augustine's decision was the only thing anyone talked about. Phone calls lingered longer. Conversations dropped to whispers the moment he entered. And the invitations? They stopped coming altogether. At the estate, the shift was even more obvious. Staff who once moved with quiet respect now exchanged cold glances when Miriam walked past. Some obeyed her slowly, reluctantly. Others didn't even bother to hide their disapproval. "She's already acting like the mistress of the house," one whispered. "Acting," the other replied. "She thinks she is." Miriam heard every word, but she didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She didn't try to win anyone over. If anything, she became even more direct, more unapologetic. And that only made things worse. One afternoon, the tension finally snapped. A few of Augustine's acquaintances stopped by. The air was polite until Miriam walked in. One woman leaned toward another, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people just don't know how to stay in their place." If anyone had bothered to look closer, they would have noticed. Not the arguments, not the raised voices everyone loved to gossip about, but the details. Small, quiet things, hidden in a room full of judgment. It started in the study. Late one evening, Augustine reached for a bottle hidden behind old case files. His hand trembled as he poured the amber liquid. But before the glass reached his lips, it was gone. "No, give that back." She didn't move. Instead, she walked to the bin and poured it out. Just like that. "You have no right," he started. "I have every right," she cut in sharply, "because you clearly won't stop yourself." His pride flared, but later that night he didn't go looking for another bottle. Breakfast became non-negotiable. "You're not leaving this table until you eat," Miriam said, slamming a plate in front of him. "I'm not a child," Augustine snapped. "Then stop behaving like one," she replied without blinking. Minutes passed. Then slowly, reluctantly, he picked up his fork. Then came the medication. Tiny pills, easy to ignore. Augustine tried, but Miriam didn't let him. Take it. I'll take it later. No, now. I said later. And I said, now. The standoff lasted seconds, but every time, she won. At first he resisted. The control irritated him. It challenged his ego. But slowly something shifted. The drinking stopped. The meals became consistent. Even his posture changed. His energy, his presence, it was undeniable. But no one else saw it. Not the staff, not the guests. All they saw was a loud woman, a disrespectful maid, a problem. They didn't see the pattern. They didn't see the intention. And that was the truth hidden in plain sight. But no one knew why she was really doing it. Not everything had changed. Not completely. Because some habits don't disappear overnight. They hide. Late at night, when the house fell silent, Augustine would sit alone in his study. Same room, same shadows, and sometimes the same bottle. But it wasn't the same anymore. The glass trembled in his grip. His breathing grew heavy. And then it happened. He stood up too quickly. The room spun. His vision blurred at the edges. He lunged for the desk, missing it, catching the edge just before hitting the floor. For a second, he almost collapsed. The silence in the room deepened. It wasn't peaceful. It was dangerous. He steadied himself, exhaling slowly, pretending he was still in control. But he wasn't alone. From the hallway, just beyond the half-closed door, someone was watching. Cynthia. She didn't step in. She didn't call for help. She simply stood there, observing, understanding. A faint smile touched her lips. Not warm, not kind, but knowing. Some people don't need enemies. They destroy themselves. She turned and walked away, her footsteps quiet and controlled. But two truths had just taken shape. Something was deeply wrong with Augustine. And Cynthia? Cynthia knew exactly how bad it really was. The day of the wedding arrived wrapped in elegance and suffocating tension. White roses lined the aisle, and golden light filtered through tall windows, casting a glow that felt almost too perfect. To an outsider, it was a dream, but inside, something was deeply off. Guests didn't laugh. Conversations were sharper. Whispers moved faster than smiles. Is he really going through with this? I heard she shouted at him again. This won't last. Judgment filled the room like a heavy pressure no one could ignore. At the front, Augustine stood waiting, calm, composed, but those who looked closely saw a new weight in his eyes. And then, there was Miriam. No dramatic walk, no diamonds, just a simple, modest gown. Unshaken. She didn't seek approval, she only saw Augustine. And somehow, that made everyone even more uncomfortable. Then, a shift. The back doors creaked open, heads turned. She stepped in slowly, deliberately late. Every movement was controlled. Every detail was flawless. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Cynthia, refined and radiant, against Miriam, simple and unmoved. Cynthia paused, scanning the room like she was viewing a crime scene. The guests, the tension, the bride Cynthia. A small smile touched her lips. Not warm, not supportive, calculated. She walked forward, each step measured, as if she had been waiting for this exact second. The air tightened, the music softened, and just as Augustine prepared to begin the ceremony, just as the vows were about to be spoken, Cynthia stood up. Cynthia didn't rush. She let the silence settle, letting every eye in the room find her, letting the weight of her presence build. Then calmly, almost gently, she broke it. Before you make a mistake, you deserve the truth. The words landed like a crack through glass. The ceremony froze mid-breath. Augustine didn't speak. Miriam didn't move. Cynthia stepped forward slowly, lifting a small envelope in her hand. I didn't want to do this, she continued, but some things shouldn't be hidden. Not on a day like this. She opened it. And then, one by one, she revealed the photographs. The first image? Miriam, finger pointed sharply at Augustine, her face tense, caught mid-argument. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The second, Miriam storming out of the house, her expression hard, the door slamming behind her. The third, another confrontation, closer, louder, more intense. This, Cynthia said softly, holding the images high, is the woman you're about to marry. The room shifted instantly. Everything people had whispered was now confirmed. I knew it. She's unstable, unacceptable. Judgment spread like fire. Even the staff exchanged knowing looks. It was all right there, clear, undeniable. But through it all, Miriam said nothing. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She remained exactly where she was, calm, still, untouched by the storm. That silence unsettled people more than the photos. If she was guilty, why not fight back? Cynthia noticed that calm. For just a second, something in her expression flickered. But she held her ground. The damage was done. The room had turned. It seemed like everything was over. The woman everyone doubted had just been exposed. The room held its breath. Judgment had already taken its place. But Augustine didn't react. He stood there, too calm, his eyes moving from the photos to Cynthia, and then slowly to Miriam. The silence was almost heavy enough to break. Then Augustine spoke. There is someone who should speak. From the side of the gathering, a man stepped forward, calm, composed, dressed in a simple suit that contrasted the formality of the room. It was Augustine's doctor. He looked at the crowd and said, "What I'm about to say is not opinion, it is fact." Curiosity replaced certainty. A few years ago, the doctor began, after the loss of his wife, Augustine's health began to decline, severely. His liver was damaged. His alcohol consumption had reached dangerous levels. If nothing had changed, he would not be standing here today. Real silence hit the room. Not judgment, but shock. The doctor gestured toward the photographs still in Cynthia's hands. These images, he said firmly, are not evidence of abuse. They are evidence of intervention. Then came the line that changed everything. Every improvement in his health began the exact week Miriam started those arguments. That first photo? That was the night she found him drinking alone after being warned to stop. The moment she walked out, that wasn't anger, it was an ultimatum. She told him she would leave if he didn't choose to live. Each image was reframed, each accusation dismantled. What looked like disrespect was protection. What felt like aggression was desperation. The eyes that once judged now questioned. The voices that once whispered now fell silent. In the middle of the storm, Miriam remained exactly the same, calm, still, unmoved. She had never needed to prove anything, because the truth was finally speaking for her. But what would Augustine do to Cynthia now? A wide shot of the seated wedding guests. Many are now looking down at their laps or turning away in shame. The perfect atmosphere of the wedding now feels heavy with their guilt. Moody, atmospheric lighting. The silence that followed wasn't the same. This time, it wasn't filled with judgment. It was filled with realization. Slow, uncomfortable, inevitable. All eyes turned back to Augustine. He stepped forward, his voice calm, but deeper now. "You all saw her raise her voice," he began. "You saw the arguments, the moments that made you uncomfortable." He paused, letting the memories settle. "But none of you asked why." The silence was answer enough. Augustine's gaze shifted. And Cynthia, the name alone tightened the air. She knew. For 2 years she watched me destroy myself, my health declining, my life slipping. And she said, "Nothing." A flicker of discomfort moved through the crowd. "Why?" Augustine asked softly. "Because it was easier. Easier to manage a grieving man than to confront him. Easier to stay close to power than to risk losing it. Easier to let me fall than to force me to stand. Each word peeled a layer away. Cynthia's composure began to crack. Her hands tightened. Her breathing shifted. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. No defense, no denial, just the kind of silence that exposes everything. Around her, the room had already changed. The people who once admired her now looked at her with disappointment. Meanwhile, Miriam remained exactly where she had been, calm, grounded, unaffected. Augustine turned toward his bride, his voice softening. The woman you all doubted was the only one who refused to let me die. And just like that, everything reversed, completely. The tension finally began to lift, replaced by a reverent stillness. The weight of the truth settled over the room like an inevitable tide. Augustine stepped closer to Miriam, his eyes filled with a vulnerability no one had ever seen. She was the only one who loved me enough to risk losing me, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed room. While everyone else whispered behind my back, while everyone else pretended, you faced the truth. You saved me. Miriam looked up at him, her voice soft but carrying the weight of years of courage. I wasn't afraid of losing him, she said. I was afraid of burying him. A collective shiver ran through the room. The guests who had mocked and judged were now witnessing something far more powerful than scandal. They were witnessing real love, the kind that demands sacrifice and unwavering courage. Even Cynthia, seated at the back, could no longer hide. Her mask of control was gone. Miriam's courage had rewritten the story, and Augustine's life had been saved because of it. The ceremony resumed with a new, sacred energy. No more whispers, no more pointed glances. Just the bond between two people who had faced the truth and emerged stronger together. In that moment, the moral was clear. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it is loud. Sometimes it is uncompromising. And sometimes it is the only thing brave enough to save a life when everyone else looks away. The billionaire and the maid stood united. If you believe the truth always comes to light, hit like and subscribe for more stories of justice and love. Everyone said she was too rough for him. They laughed at her bluntness. They mocked her sharp tongue. They whispered behind their expensive fans that she simply didn't belong in his world. But they were wrong. She was the only one who cared enough to tell him the truth. The only one willing to risk his anger, his pride, and even her place in his life, just to save him. Because sometimes the loudest love is the realest one. It's not always found in soft whispers or polite smiles. In the end, it wasn't elegance or charm that saved Augustine's life. It was courage. It was honesty. It was a heart unafraid to fight for the man she loved. True love sees what the world ignores. If you believe Miriam was the hero all along, hit the like button and subscribe to join our community for more stories of justice and hidden truth.